Rose wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, her fingers threading through his hair and resting on the nape of his neck. Gavin responded with gentle caresses, but they grew stronger as their emotions surged. Years of repression, of loneliness, had built up, now bursting forth in a whirlwind, sweeping away all reason. Welcome to our channel. If you love engaging and emotional love stories, then come to our channel. Here we will bring you stories full of surprises, touching and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any interesting stories. In today's video, we would like to present to you a story called The Lady and the Carpenter, narrated by Jane. Please watch along. In the hot sun of a summer day, Mr. Gavin, a carpenter over 50, sat quietly at an old wooden table in his yard. The house was located on the edge of the village, surrounded by sparse trees, creating a lonely space. There was no sound of roosters crowing, no sound of children playing, only the sound of starlings chirping on the branches and the sound of the wind rustling through the dry leaves. Mr. Gavin's short-sleeved shirt was hung loosely on the back of a chair, revealing his tanned back with firm flesh, each muscle clearly visible. Sweat dripped down his back and soaked into the rough fabric pants he was wearing. Over 50 years old, his figure was still toned and strong, a testament to the years of hard work tirelessly working with hammers, chisels and saws. He was not tall, but his well-proportioned body with broad shoulders and strong arms made many young people in the village admire him. His life was simple and quiet. He lived alone since his wife left him for another man, a rich merchant in the district. At that time, his young wife could not stand living every day surrounded by sawdust and the smell of paint and glue on her husband's clothes. She criticised Mr. Gavin for being poor and having a miserable job, so she gradually distanced herself from him and finally fell in love with someone else. His only daughter also followed her husband to a faraway village, only occasionally coming to visit him a few days a year. Mr. Gavin was used to loneliness. Every morning he woke up to the sound of a rooster crowing, boiled water to make tea, and quietly brought his tools to the yard to start a working day. For him, the sound of chiselling into wood was the most familiar music in his life. He did not need friends or companions. He had rough wooden boards and the sophisticated products he made. They were his joy and also his only reason to live. But deep inside, Mr. Gavin always felt a cold emptiness, especially late at night, when the wind blew through the cracks in the door and darkness enveloped the small house. One summer day, when Mr. Gavin was busy carving a plough in the yard, a voice called out from outside the gate. "Mr. Hung, is Mr. Hung home?" Mr. Gavin raised his head, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and slowly walked out. Before him was a woman in her 40s, tall and slim, but still exuding the fullness and charm of an experienced woman. Rose, that woman, was standing by his simple wooden gate, smiling gently. She was wearing a light blue silk dress, the hem of the dress hanging loosely, revealing her smooth, bare shoulders and elegant high neck. The faint scent from her skin spread through the air, causing Mr. Gavin to be momentarily stunned. Rose was unlike any woman he had ever met, not rustic, not hasty, but exuding a strangely soft elegance. "You are Hung, right? I heard that you are a skillful craftsman, so I want to ask you to help me make a bed." Mr. Gavin looked at Rose, feeling a little surprised and confused. This woman was very different from the people who usually came to his house to ask him to make tables and chairs or repair cabinets. She was not like an ordinary woman in the village. From the way she dressed to her demeanour, she exuded elegance and charm. "I have wood at home. I just need you to come over and help me." "I heard you work carefully, so I came all the way here to find it," Rose said, her eyes intently following Mr. Gavin. Mr. Gavin frowned slightly. Her words were gentle, but there was something hidden in that look. Even so, he remained calm. "Okay, I'll arrange to come over to your house tomorrow." Rose smiled contentedly, her eyes shining with joy. "See you tomorrow. I'll wait." She turned and walked away, leaving in the air the faint scent of jasmine and the thin silk shirt swaying with each step. Mr. Gavin stood watching that figure, his heart feeling a strange flutter. It had been a long time since his wife left. He had never felt such a strange feeling, a feeling of excitement and embarrassment, and somewhere a bit of desire was kindling. The next morning, Mr. Gavin cycled to the neighbouring village, carrying the necessary tools. When he arrived, he was overwhelmed by Rose's house. The house was large, with elaborately carved wooden pillars, a bright red-tiled roof, and a spacious garden filled with flowers. The housekeeper came out to greet him from afar, leading him inside with a warm attitude. Rose walked out of the living room, still keeping a gentle smile on her lips. Today she wore a white silk dress, which further highlighted her fair skin. "Mr. Hung is here? Come in and rest a bit before working." Mr. Gavin walked in, feeling embarrassed by the luxury of the house. Everything exuded nobility, from the precious wooden tables and chairs to the soft silk curtains hanging on the windows. He put down his tools and sat down at Rose's invitation. She poured him a cup of fragrant tea and sat down opposite. "You must be lonely living alone, right?" Rose asked, her voice gentle and curious. Mr. Gavin nodded slightly. "I'm used to it. I only know how to make friends with wood." Rose chuckled, her eyes sparkling with something profound. "It's a waste for someone like you to live alone." The first days working at Rose's house passed peacefully, but for Mr. Gavin, those were days filled with mixed emotions. Every morning, he woke up early, prepared his tools, and cycled to her house. He was not only overwhelmed by the luxury of the house, but also captivated by Rose's appearance and charm. The landlady was always dressed neatly, her soft silk hugging her full curves. Every time he bent down to chisel wood or saw boards, she would stand far away and look at him with sparkling eyes. Although he did not say anything, every time he met her eyes, Mr. Gavin felt his heart stirred as if swept away by an underground current. "You work so hard. It's strange that no one notices you," Rose joked one afternoon as he was busy polishing the bed frame. Mr. Gavin could only smile wryly. "I'm used to it. No one would notice someone like me," he replied with a hint of self-deprecation. But Rose just smiled. "No, I believe that if people knew you, they wouldn't ignore you." Mr. Gavin hesitated, not knowing how to respond. But Rose's every word and every smile was like drops of water seeping into his dry heart. One day, as the afternoon began to fall, Mr. Gavin finished the bed frame. A gentle breeze blew through the garden, carrying the scent of jasmine in the air. Rose stepped out of the house, holding a thin towel in her hand. "It's so hot, Uncle. Rest a bit and then come and have dinner with me," Rose said, her gentle eyes filled with concern. Mr. Gavin wanted to refuse. He had long been used to going home after work. But there was something in Rose's eyes that made it difficult for him to refuse. "Come in, I can cook a few dishes. There's no one at home now, just you and me." Those words were gentle but contained an invisible sadness. Mr. Gavin nodded, wiped his sweat, and followed Rose into the house. Her kitchen was clean and tidy, a far cry from the simple kitchen at his house. Rose invited him to sit down. The wooden table was already set with several simple but delicious dishes. "Don't be so polite. I'm not a very good cook, but I hope you don't mind," Rose said, her eyes slightly shy. They sat and ate together in silence, with only the soft sound of their bowls and chopsticks touching each other. Mr. Gavin felt a strange feeling of warmth and closeness, as if it had been a long time since he had sat down to eat with someone so peacefully. After the meal, Rose did not rush to get up. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes looking far away into the garden. Then, as if she could not control herself, she spoke softly. "Uncle Hung, I'm asking you honestly, do you ever feel like you need someone by your side?" Mr. Gavin was a little stunned and then looked down to avoid her eyes. "I'm used to it, Rose. I'm used to being alone. I don't think about anyone anymore." Rose smiled slightly, but it was a smile that carried a bit of bitterness. People say they're used to being alone, but in reality, they just don't dare admit that they need someone. Mr. Gavin was silent. Rose's words seemed to touch a hidden corner of his soul, where he had hidden his lonely feelings for so many years, but he remained silent, not daring to respond. That night, as Mr. Gavin was about to leave, Rose suddenly grabbed his hand. "Stay, I have something to tell you." Her voice was soft, but there was something urgent in her eyes. Mr. Gavin's heart beat faster. He didn't know why, but he couldn't refuse, as if an invisible string was pulling him closer to her. Rose led him into the private room, where the bed was still unfinished. She sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes filled with emotion as she looked at him. "Uncle Hung, I'm so lonely. Can you stay with me?" Her words were a confession, an undeniable plea. Mr. Gavin felt himself drowning in her gaze, in the gentle scent of her skin. He hesitantly stepped forward, then finally let his reason drift with his emotions. The door closed behind them. The sound was small, but it seemed to echo in both of their minds. The dim light from the oil lamp flickering on the table created a dim light, reflecting off the wooden walls and the large silk-covered bed. The surrounding space was silent, except for Rose's soft breathing and Mr. Gavin's pounding heart in his chest. Rose walked slowly towards him, each step on the wooden floor making a soft sound as if the whole room was immersed in an atmosphere thick with nameless emotions. The light reflected on her smooth white skin, highlighting the softness of the thin silk shirt covering her body. She stopped close to Mr. Gavin, her eyes sparkling with desire, quiet but intense. Mr. Gavin stood rooted to the spot, both nervous and afraid. Years of loneliness had left him bereft of intimacy, and now in this dim space he felt himself drifting into a dream with no way out. Rose stepped closer, her soft hands on his chest, her fingers lightly brushing his skin, tanned and calloused by years of carpentry. Mr. Gavin trembled but did not back away. Her hands slid up his broad shoulders, as if to reassure him, as if to hold on to something so as not to let it slip away. "Uncle Hung, let me have this night," she whispered, her voice fading into the air. Those whispers made Mr. Gavin lose his mind. His heart was pounding in his chest, emotions surging, and then he leaned down slightly, wrapped his arms around her waist, and pulled her into his embrace. Rose did not resist, just leaned gently against his chest, her eyes half closed, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. Mr. Gavin leaned down, slightly, letting his lips touch her bare shoulder. Rose's skin was cool and fragrant with jasmine, an intoxicating scent that he couldn't resist. She froze at Mr. Gavin's first touch, then closed her eyes and let the sensations take her. Rose slowly let go, pulling the silk shirt off her body. The shirt gently fell to the floor, revealing her white skin and soft curves. The oil lamp flickered on her body, creating a scene that was both real and unreal. Rose looked up at Mr. Gavin, her eyes shining in the night, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Mr. Gavin was silent for a moment, but then his hands slid down to her waist, feeling the softness and warmth of her skin. Rose said nothing, just put her hands on his shoulders, pulling him closer. They fell onto the bed covered with soft silk sheets, entwined, like two people who had been abandoned in the desert and now found each other after a long thirst. Rose's breathing was rapid, mingling with the creaking of the bed as they moved. Rose wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, her fingers threading through his hair, resting on the nape of his neck. Gavin responded with gentle caresses, but growing more forceful as their emotions grew. Years of repression, of loneliness accumulated for so long, burst into a whirlwind, sweeping away all reason. "I need you so much," Rose whispered between quick breaths, her eyes melting with emotion. Mr. Gavin said nothing, but his arms tightened around her waist, as if to affirm that he would not let her go. His touches were no longer timid but bold, exploring every line of her body, like a carpenter familiarizing every piece of wood in his hands. Rose moaned softly, a moan mixed with satisfaction and desire. She held him tightly, as if afraid that if she let go, everything would just be a dream. As their rhythm slowed, Mr. Gavin leaned back, pulling Rose to rest her head on his chest. She closed her eyes, a contented smile on her lips, as if all the burdens of life had been lifted. For a moment, they lay there without saying anything more. Rose gently caressed his chest, her soft fingers tracing the veins on his muscular body. Mr. Gavin closed his eyes, feeling her steady breathing on his skin, and for the first time in years, he felt strangely at peace. "Don't leave me, Uncle," Rose whispered in the darkness. Mr. Gavin didn't answer, just gently placed a kiss on her forehead. In that moment, there was no more past, no more pain, just two people reaching out to each other in the dark, finding comfort and peace that they had lost long ago. The two of them fell into a dream, as if they were lost in a fairyland. The wooden bed creaked as if it had just experienced a strong earthquake, and then finally became quiet. That was the climax. The climax ended after many hours of climax. That night, in the quiet room, they found each other in the lonely voids of their souls. When everything became quiet, the two embraced each other, falling into a deep, warm sleep. The next morning, as the sunlight began to filter through the window, Mr. Gavin woke up. Rose was still sleeping soundly beside him, with a contented smile on her lips. He gently stroked her soft hair, his heart filled with indescribable emotions. But those feelings of joy were quickly replaced by worry and fear. He knew he had gone too far, crossed a line that should not have been touched, but Rose did not regret it. She looked at him with bright eyes. "I have waited a long time to meet someone like you." Mr. Gavin did not know how to answer, but something in his heart was changing. He knew that from now on, his life would never be the same again. In the days after that passionate night, Mr. Gavin and Rose seemed to enter another world. Their relationship no longer stopped at simple meetings for work. Rose began to create more excuses for him to stay longer: lunch, dinner, and then long nights. They rushed into each other like two people starving for affection and intimacy, seeking each other whenever possible. After their first night together, an inseparable bond arose between Mr. Gavin and Rose. In the afternoons after finishing work, Mr. Gavin often stayed to have dinner with Rose. Not only did they make love in the dark, they found in each other a harmony of souls. Rose was gentle, caring for him like a real wife, and Mr. Gavin, for the first time in many years, felt the warmth of a woman. Every night together, they seemed to forget all social barriers, all responsibilities and the past. Rose was not shy about showing her affection for Mr. Gavin, holding him back after each work session, sometimes even whispering softly, "Uncle Hung, stay with me," Rose said. "Don't care about anyone else." But deep down, Mr. Gavin knew that this relationship couldn't last forever. He feared that he wasn't the right man for Rose's world, a world of intrigue, money, and complicated relationships. And then what he feared most happened. One autumn day, when the golden sunlight spread across the garden, Rose and Mr. Gavin were immersed in each other's arms again, in Rose's private bedroom. They enjoyed a sweet and passionate moment. Times like this together made them forget all the gossip outside, forget the fact that the outside world was still moving. But as Mr. Gavin pulled the blanket over Rose, a loud bang came from the main door. The door was pushed open, hitting the wall with a loud bang. Mr. Gavin and Rose turned around in surprise. Before they could react, a tall man entered the room, his face filled with anger. It was Rose's ex-husband, a man of experience, but now haggard and his eyes bloodshot with rage. "Rose, you dare bring this man to your bed!" he roared, his eyes yellow like a wounded animal. Mr. Gavin sat up quickly, pulling his shirt off the bed to cover his confusion and the feeling of fear that was rising inside him. But before he could put it on, the other man lunged at him, grabbed him by the collar, and pulled him back down onto the bed. "Who the hell are you, sleeping with my wife?" he hissed, grabbing Mr. Gavin's collar and pushing him to the floor. Rose rushed forward, trying to stop him. "Stop it! We're separated. You have no right to me anymore." But the man didn't listen. He turned to Rose, his eyes full of anger and contempt. "You think just because we're separated you're free to bring another man home? Who the hell is this guy that you'd consider him better than me?" Mr. Gavin sat up, trying to keep his composure. He knew that this situation could get worse if he didn't act carefully. "I don't want to cause trouble. Miss Rose said you two were separated. I didn't mean to intrude," he said, his voice low but controlled. But the man didn't listen. He looked at Rose with contempt. "Do you think I believe you? You ran out of money, so now you're taking this carpenter home to raise?" Rose clenched her fists, anger rising. "You came back here just for money, right?" "Stop acting. You don't need me, just my money." The man chuckled. "Yes, I need money, but I won't allow you to smear me like this." Before Mr. Gavin could say anything, the man suddenly threw a strong punch to his face. The blow was so strong and decisive that Mr. Gavin staggered to the floor. Rose screamed to stop her. Rose turned to Mr. Gavin, her face a mixture of pain and concern. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice choked. Mr. Gavin shook his head, rubbing the cut on his cheek, but said nothing. He felt like he was in the middle of a war he shouldn't be in. The ex-husband gasped, his eyes looking at Rose as if he wanted to tear her apart. "I don't care who you love, but I'm telling you, if you don't give me the money, I won't leave you and this guy alone." Rose gritted her teeth, her eyes flashing with indignation. "How much do you want? Tell me clearly." The man smirked. "I need 5 million now." Rose stood up and walked out of the room with a cold expression on her face. She didn't say another word, but her determined eyes showed that she was ready to pay any price to end everything. After giving the money to her ex-husband, Rose returned to her room and sat down on the bed, looking exhausted. She put her hands on her head, as if trying to forget everything that had just happened. Mr. Gavin sat next to her, silent for a long time, then softly said, "Miss Rose, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be here." But Rose turned, her eyes wet with tears but full of determination. "No, Uncle Hung, don't apologize. Tonight was my choice, and I don't regret it." Mr. Gavin looked deep into her eyes, seeing not only hurt, but also relief. Rose had decided to end her past, and she had chosen him to be her companion. In the days following her encounter with her ex-husband, things had become quiet. Rose no longer had to live in fear of being harassed. The money she had given him had severed the last ties between them. Rose was now free, but one question weighed heavily on her mind. Would Mr. Gavin stay with her forever? Mr. Gavin knew that his life, it would never be the same again. The villagers had begun to gossip about his relationship with Rose, but he paid them no attention. The gossip no longer carried the weight it had in previous years. Now what concerned him most was Rose, a complex woman who was, deep down, weaker and lonelier than anyone he had ever known. One afternoon, as they sat together in the courtyard, Rose leaned against his shoulder, her eyes gazing out through the trees. "Do you ever regret anything?" Rose asked, her voice low as if afraid of the answer. Gavin was silent for a moment, his eyes also gazing out at the horizon, reddened by the setting sun. "No," he replied simply but firmly. "I only regret not meeting you sooner." Rose smiled softly, tears rolling down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, because she had finally found someone who truly wanted to be with her. One day, Rose made a big decision. "Uncle Hung, let's leave this place. I want to start over in a place where no one knows us, no one judges us,